Okay, let's go ahead and start with raising happy teens, teen discipline. What do you want for your kids? Give that a little bit of thought. Not only what do you want for them today and tomorrow, but a year from now, and 6 years from now, and 20 years from now. These are sayings that I sometimes hear people say. That was good enough for me, so it should be good enough for my kids. Is that your thinking? Or how about this? I did that when I was a kid and I turned out all right. Is that what we want for our kids? Just the bare minimum? The bare minimum that we got and turning out all right? Is that what we want for our kids? Or do we want something more and better for them? Do we want to be able to give them the best that we have to give? And do we want them to have the happiest, most successful life that they can have? Of course we do. So we're going to talk about some of the ways that you can help your kids to achieve that tonight. Number 3, here's another thing that I've heard parents say. How can I expect my kid not to do that when I did that when I was a kid? Things like sneak out of the house at night or trying drugs and alcohol. Well, I think the way you can expect him not to do that is because you have learned and you now know what is good for your kids and what's not good for your kids. And so you're going to enforce that and save your kids from making the same mistakes that you made. At least you're going to try to save them from that. I've heard parents ask, how can I expect him not to do that when I do that now? Well, do you need to change your behavior? Is it something like smoking where maybe you're not setting a good example? What about something like drinking? Well, the difference is that it's legal for adults and it's not legal for kids. All right? It's a big difference. Maybe you know how to drink in moderation. 1 beer, 1 glass of wine with dinner. That's different than teens who want to go out and party all night and get drunk. We want what's best for our kids. Along the same lines, we need to be really careful about giving our kids mixed messages. When we say things like, don't have sex, but if you do, use protection, what are we saying? We're telling them that, well, we kind of expect that they will have sex, and the really important thing that we care about is that they use protection. And if we're using that phrase, we're also giving them the impression that condoms will protect them. It may protect them from getting pregnant most of the time, but it's not going to protect them from STDs. And we need to let them know that. We're going to go into all these things a little bit more tonight and next week. Don't drink, but if you do, don't drive. What do your kids hear when you say something like that? They hear, oh, Mom and Dad expect me to drink, but they don't want me to drink and drive. Remember, kids live up to or down to our expectations. If we expect that they're going to have premarital sex, try drugs and alcohol, smoke cigarettes, they'll know that. They'll know that we have those expectations, and they will live up to or down to those expectations and do those things. I want to encourage you to share your beliefs, your values, and your expectations with your kids. They are your kids. You don't have to raise them according to society standards or TV's standards. In TV, everybody has sex on the first date. But that doesn't have to be okay with you, and you can let your kids know that. You expect something bigger and better out of them. You value other things. How can you share your beliefs, your values, and your expectations with your kids? By talking to them and listening to them. Remember we talked about active listening last week? How you stop what you're doing, look at the kid, and really listen, which means you're not talking, and then you repeat back to him what he said so that it encourages him to tell you more. Family meetings are a good opportunity for you to share your thoughts. And it's a good opportunity for your kids to share their thoughts, too. and to get some exchange going there. How about talking to your kids when you're driving rather than listening to blaring music over the radio or talking on your cell phone to someone else? How rude is that? Talking to someone else when you've got your kid right there. Would you do that if it was your neighbor sitting in the car with you? No, you wouldn't. You can eat together regularly with the TV turned off. Talk about what's happening at work, at school, at church, in the community, in the news. Just share your thoughts, your questions, your ideas, the fun times, the scary things, the things you're puzzled or perplexed about. If you're willing to share your perplexities, your kids will share them with you also. Make sure you play together and read good books aloud and talk about them and talk about the values that are expressed in the story. Choose movies with a lesson and talk about those. These are all ways that you can share your beliefs, your values, and your expectations. Okay, let's talk about strong-willed kids for a minute. First of all, I want you to know that if you have a strong-willed child, it's not your fault. It's not that you did something wrong or raised them incorrectly. Strong-willed kids are born that way. And there's really nothing wrong with being strong-willed. Strong-willed kids are just kids that persist and don't give up and persevere at things, which can be annoying when you're trying to discipline them. But on the other hand, it can be a really good trait for getting things done. A lot of strong-willed kids turn into adults who don't give up and accomplish a lot. If you've got at least 2 kids, you probably have at least one strong-willed child. Go ahead and click on your green check mark if you've got one. I see Joseph clicked already. Okay, what's the difference? Here's a compliant child. A compliant child is eager to please. It only takes a word or a look to get him to stop. He listens to explanations and agrees, and he knows when he deserves consequences. On the other hand, a strong-willed child argues with everything, tries to manipulate you, doesn't listen to reason. They learn only from their own mistakes. They say things like, "But that won't happen to me." I remember one year when my middle son was in a senior in high school, and about the time nearing graduation, they had the fire department come in and do this super duper talk and demonstration on the harms of drinking and driving. They had a car that they crashed into a brick wall with the crash car dummy inside, and they even had a student from their high school who had been involved in a drinking and driving accident as a freshman and was now in a wheelchair because of it. She got up and spoke to the kids about the harms of drinking and driving. You would think that everybody who watched that would be shocked into, "Oh my gosh, I'm never going to drink and drive." But there are those kids who look at that kind of thing and say, "But that's not going to happen to me. I won't crash. I'm not drunk. I'll just drink after a few beers and I won't be drunk." They don't realize that it can happen to them. And in this particular scenario, unfortunately, there was a drinking and driving accident in our community a couple of weeks after that demonstration. Very sad. Kids in the hospital and that. Very sad, but this is why it is so important for us as parents to supervise our kids, to know where they're at and what they're doing. Because some kids, especially the strong-willed kids, don't have enough common sense or self-control to make wise decisions. Okay, looks like almost all of you have a strong-willed child. Don't despair. Strong-willed children are fine. They're good. They just are a little bit tougher to raise, but you can get through it. Pretty much what it takes is to be a little bit more consistent with your disciplining than you are with your compliant kids. It takes a little more effort, a little more consistency, but pretty much the same techniques. All right, let's talk about the ways kids manipulate parents. They lie. They say, Mom said I could, when she didn't. Or they say, I wasn't late. My watch said 10 o'clock on the button. I can't help it if your clock in the house said 10:05. They blame someone else. It wasn't my fault. I tried to get John to bring me home in time, but he wouldn't leave. I couldn't get him into the car. Well, guess what? That means your child needs to find somebody else to give him a ride home because John isn't dependable. Guilt. You don't love me. You're mean. You're not my real mom. You don't understand me. Do those kind of comments make you feel bad and make you give in? How about withdrawal of love? I hate you. Or badgering you until you give in. Arguing. And some kids can argue with some pretty good arguments that you have difficulty refuting. But we're going to talk about this. You don't have to refute their arguments. All I want from you at this point is to think about which of these ways your kids manipulate you. And finally, some kids are passive-aggressive. They get cute, they agree, they say they're going to comply and do it, but then they don't keep their promises and they don't do what they said they were going to do. Each one of us has some buttons, and our kids learn them really quickly, and they push them to their advantage. So think about this. Let's take a little survey. Which technique do your kids use the most? You can just click on your answer on the screen here. You can only click on one. You may find that you've got different kids that use different techniques, or even one child who uses several techniques, but just click on the one that's like used the most often or that really trips you up the worst. Okay, we've got some badgering, some arguing, and some passive-aggressive. All righty. We're going to talk about how to deal with those things. As a matter of fact, we're going to go through 5 discipline techniques for teens. Grandma's rule, the broken record technique, the 24-hour rule, over practice, and an extra chore. We'll talk about each one in detail, and you can decide which one you like best and which one you think you'd like to use in different sorts of situations. Well, let's go into the broken record technique first. This is an excellent technique. Those of you who attended the classes for parents of young children will remember this, because this is a technique that you can use with little kids as well as with teenagers. The broken record technique is exactly what it says. You become a broken record and say the same thing over and over again. Folks, you got to realize that it takes 2 people to argue. So if you just refuse, there can be no argument. First and foremost, you can just simply shut up, close your mouth, walk away, not say anything. Not let them push your argument button. Even better than that, though, is to state the rule and explain why you have it only once. A lot of parents get into the trap of explaining themselves over and over again. This is why you can't stay out all night. This is why you can't hang around so-and-so. This is why you've got to come in an hour earlier than the other kids. You're not going to convince them the 10th time you explain it. They know the reason why. They just don't like it. You're operating with reason and logic, and they're working on emotion. The two don't mix. So you don't have to repeat yourself over and over again and give the same lecture over and over. Simply state it once. They understood it. After that, use that broken record technique. You can just keep repeating the rule, like curfew's at 10 o'clock. Oh, but that's not fair. Everybody else gets to stay out until at least 11 o'clock. Curfew is at 10 o'clock. Oh, you are such a meanie. Everybody else's parents are nice. I wish I had Susie's mom for a mom. Curfew is at 10 o'clock. Oh, I hate you. Curfew is still at 10 o'clock. Do you get the idea? No matter which one of those manipulation buttons they push, your answer is still the same. You're repeating the rule. Or you can simply say over and over again, the answer is no. The answer is no. Now, you don't have to answer their every argument. You've probably refuted them in the past, and it's not going to help to do it again and again. But let's say your kids shout something at you like, you don't love me, or you never let me go anywhere. And they're wrong, of course, because you do love them. And as a matter of fact, last week you let them stay out an extra hour because they went to the prom and went to a breakfast afterwards or whatever. Don't argue it now, though. Come back with your answers later when they are calm. You can come back later and refute some of those arguments that your child was giving when they're not arguing with you, when they've already accepted the fact that they have to be in at 10 o'clock. Maybe it's the next morning that you come back and you say, hey, remember last night when you said that I don't love you because I wouldn't let you stay out past 10 o'clock? Well, that's not true. I love you more than you can possibly imagine. And that's the reason why I want you home at 10. I want to take good care of you. That's my job. Or if they say, you never let me do anything, you can say, hey, remember when I let you borrow my car and go all the way to Boise last weekend for that rock concert? I do let you do things sometimes. Okay, do you see the difference here? You're going to refute the argument and prove them wrong, but not at the time during the heat of the argument and the emotion. You want to wait until their emotions are calmed down. And number 6, you don't have to have the last word. You have to have the last action. And what I mean from that is that, let's say you're using the broken record technique and saying curfew's at 10, and your kid storms out of the house and says, I'm not going to be home by 10, and slams the door and leaves. You don't have to go open the door back up and then shout out the door, you sure as heck better be back by 10 o'clock. That's not necessary. That's getting in the last word. It doesn't matter. What you want to have is the last action. In other words, you want to make sure that he does come home by 10 o'clock or that you've got some negative consequences that you're going to enforce. That's what matters, not the words. It's the consequences that matter, that will get him to change his behavior. Okay, let's stop here and see if you've got any thoughts or questions or comments at this point. I'm going to open up my text chat box and see what you're saying. Oh, Joseph says, I wonder if I push my morals, thoughts, and political and religious beliefs too much. I certainly think that you should express them and give your kids opportunities to mull them over and think and discuss them also. There's a difference between pushing your beliefs onto someone and expressing and explaining them. And that's, I think, is the most important part. Okay, any questions up to this point? Dan, okay? Oh, all right. Asked and answered when they try to keep repeating the question request. Very good. I like that. Okay, let's go on to Grandma's Rule. Grandma's Rule is basically a built-in reward. And again, this works with all ages of kids, little kids and teenagers. Yes, you may have dessert as soon as you eat your peas. That's kind of the typical statement a grandma would say. That's why I call it Grandma's Rule. Yes, you may do what you want as soon as you do what I want you to do. The real beauty in this technique is the fact that you're the good guy. You are saying yes. And the teen is now responsible for whether or not he gets to do what he wants. His actions determine his consequences. And this is teaching him responsibility. There is a huge difference between saying, no, you can't go out tonight. You haven't done your chores. And sure, you can go out as soon as you get your chores done. The first scenario makes the kid hate you. Oh, man, he can mutter under his breath. She is so mean, she never lets me do anything. But if you answer nicely in a nice tone of voice, sure, you can go out as soon as you get your chores done. Suddenly he realizes that he's the one who determines whether or not he gets to do what he wants to do. And of course, he wants to go out, so he's more likely to go do his chores. It's a very good motivator to get your kids to do the things that you want them to do because of that built-in reward. Okay. What kinds of things can you use for their rewards? It would be a good idea for you to make a list of your wants and their wants. And I think that most people, when you write down your wants, most of us have pretty much the same wants. We want our kids to do their chores, clean their room, and do their homework. And not really a whole lot more. It's pretty simple. But most of our kids have a whole list of things that they want to do. Different kids have different things. Some kids really want to go out and call friends and talk on the phone and have a friend over. And then there's other kids who aren't as social. And what really matters to them is things like watching TV or playing computer and Nintendo. Got to know your kids. And you might have two kids with a totally different list of their wants. But these are the things that you can use to motivate your kids. Yes, you can do these things as soon as you do these things on the right. Okay? Use this to your advantage. Now we're also going to use this list for removing privileges also, which we'll talk about in a minute. But first thing I want to do is give you another little survey here. I am curious to know, how well does grounding work for you? Great, pretty well, sometimes, not very well, or it doesn't work at all. Or maybe you haven't even used grounding. Is everybody voting? Okay, most of you say pretty well, work sometimes. Well, there are several problems that are inherent in grounding. And unless you use grounding just right, you can run into some of these problems. For example, number one, you ground your kids from their friends, but then they end up being just as happy as a lark on the phone. Unless you say you can't go out with your friends and you can't talk to them on the phone, but then will your child be perfectly happy sitting in front of the computer? Well, then he's not feeling like he's grounded. It's not inconveniencing him any, and he's not going to change. Okay, let's talk about grounding our kids for a period of time, like 2 weeks. 2 weeks for a kid is an eternity. They can't see beyond that. To them, it feels like forever. I can't go out this weekend, and I can't go out next weekend either. I may as well give up. I'm never going to be able to go out again. They give up hope. They can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so rather than motivating them to improve their behavior, it actually discourages them and makes them give up. Number 3, what happens if they do something during that 2-week period that deserves grounding again? Do we start accumulating weeks? I remember being in 4th grade and a teacher that could not quite control the classroom. And we'd get kind of rowdy and talkative, and she'd say, okay, that's 5 minutes off your recess time. And then she'd add another 5 minutes, and then she'd get really mad and say, okay, that's it, that's the entire recess. And then we lost tomorrow's recess, and pretty soon we didn't have any recess left until the end of the year. Well, we knew she would never enforce that. So it didn't stop us from talking and chatting and being unruly. The same is true with your kids. What about number 4? Sometimes grounding your kids can be like punishing yourself, because then they're begging and pleading and making promises that you don't think they'll keep, and they're pestering you and making you miserable because they're miserable. And you can't get away from them because they're stuck at home. Or they harass you so well that you actually let them off early. You know, in a scenario like this, you would have been better off to have said, okay, you're grounded for 1 day, and to have let them off at the end of 1 day, than to say you're grounded for a week and let them off at the end of 3 days. Because you didn't keep your word, and they won. They talked you out of it. Okay, number 6. Some parents get over the anger of the moment, and they let their kids off early. Same thing, you would have been better to have just set a short time limit and stuck to it. We need to remember that the consequences that we set have to be effective and enforceable. If we can't enforce a 2-week grounding period, then we may as well not set it. And if it's not going to be effective because we ground them from their friends, but they're happy reading books all day, then what's the good of it? It doesn't work. So let's talk about the right way to discipline. The effective discipline, which you can call the 24-hour rule or the electric rule. This is a concept that I got from the Parent Project. It's a very good one. It's where you remove all of the kids' privileges for a short period of time. Rather than removing some of them privileges, and then they'll be just as happy playing with the things that you didn't take away. And it's a 24-hour rule because it's a short period of time. This is also called the electric rule because if you think about it, most of the things that are privileges that we remove from our kids are electric. Like, well, the phone used to be electric, but now we've got cell phones. Computers, TV, music, radio, CD players, most of that stuff is electric. If you remove it all, then it becomes kind of like timeout. Remember when you put your little kids in timeout and all they could do was sit there for a few minutes? They weren't listening to anything. They weren't able to watch TV. They weren't able to talk to anybody. They weren't able to play with anything. They did nothing but sit there for a few minutes. The 24-hour rule is pretty much like that. You've taken away all their privileges, so they're pretty much left with reading or writing. They can read a good book or do their homework, or they can write a letter to grandma or something like that. But they're not going to do any of their fun stuff. The 24-hour rule is enforceable because you only have to stick to it for 24 hours, and it's effective because they feel the inconvenience of it. It may only be one night because they're going to get to go to school tomorrow and be at school for 8 hours, but nonetheless, that bugs them. It's inconvenient, it's bothersome, they don't like it. They've got one evening of boringness. That will prompt them to change their behavior. The other thing I really like about the 24-hour rule is that every day is a new day and they have a chance to do it right. You might want to call this the electric rule rather than the 24-hour rule, and let it end at bedtime. You know, your child loses all of their privileges until they go to bed, or until the next morning, actually. They forget to bring home their homework. They talk back. They come home late. They don't tell you where they've been, whatever. They are grounded with the electric rule for that night. You can enforce that because it's only one evening, and it will be inconvenient enough for them that it will make them think twice. Okay, let's talk about this for a few minutes. What do you think? Do you think this would work for you kids? Have you tried anything like this? Let's get your comments here. If anybody would like to speak into their microphone, just raise your hand. Okay, do all kids need to have something planned to do something out every night? No, kids don't have to go out every night. I just have been using that as an example, but that's a rule that you can set in your family. You can decide how many times a week can your kids go out. How many evenings do they need to stay at home with the family? You decide what works for you. Okay, Christy thinks it sounds like a good idea. Haley says, I tried it once. It worked great, really. All right, awesome. Joseph says, so you ground them from the next night out? It depends on the scenario here. If the kids do something like you catch them smoking at school that day, they can be grounded for the rest of that day. If they were mean to their sibling or back talked to you or didn't do their chores or didn't do their homework or bring home their homework, they can be, you can enforce that 24-hour rule for that night. If it's a matter of your child came home late last night, then maybe it would be the next night or the next weekend night. If he comes in at 10:30 instead of 10 on Wednesday night, then maybe Friday night he needs to, you'll enforce the 24-hour rule on Friday night. If it's a matter of coming in late, then obviously it has to be the next day. It can't be enforced that day because it's already bedtime. Okay, Joseph says, if they're mostly home, grounding seems senseless. Right. And that's why, and it is for some kids who don't go out, who aren't very social, grounding doesn't mean anything. To them, it's like, big deal. I'd rather be sitting here playing with my computer anyway. So, again, this is an instance where the electric rule or the 24-hour rule really works because it takes away what your child wants most. Again, you can go back and look at that list of his wants and your wants. Make a list of what is each one of your kids into. Some kids really value their privacy. Other kids are super social and want to be out with the family all the time. If you take a kid who really values his privacy and tells him that he needs to spend the rest of the night in his room, he'll say, you see, good, I don't have to mess with the rest of the family and I can just sit in here and play on my computer all night. That will not work, okay? So make a list for each one of your kids. Okay, over practice. Here's an example of over practice. From now on, if you walk in the door and drop your coat on the floor, I'm going to have you practice hanging it up 5 times. Or putting their shoes away. Or taking their dishes over to the sink. Or putting their laundry in the hamper, whatever. This is the kind of thing that you will have to do several days in a row and make sure you really do it. Otherwise, they won't learn the lesson. If you enforce this one time and make them hang up their coat 5 times, and then the next day they come in and drop their coat on the floor and get away with it, you've lost. So make sure that you can really enforce it a few days in a row. And pretty quickly they'll be like, oh yeah, do I want to hang up my coat once or 5 times? This is another technique that you can use with little kids as well as older kids, teens. Might actually be easier to get a little kid to practice it 5 times than to get a teenager to. If you've got a teen, maybe you'll have better luck if you actually tell them you need to do that 3 times. Maybe they won't balk as hard. And again, that's what I mean by choosing consequences that are enforceable. If you don't think you can get your kid to practice taking his shoes to his bedroom 5 times, just ask him to do it twice. But make sure you ask him 3 days in a row, and then he'll get it. Okay, now we're coming to the extra chore. This was one of my favorite negative consequences for my kids because I got the benny of a chore getting done. It was like really helpful for me. You can give your kids an extra chore in response to any type of misbehavior. Here's a few examples here. If you choose not to do your chores before you go to school, I'll have an additional chore waiting for you when you get home. Or number 2, if you complain while doing your chores, I'll give you an extra chore. 3, every time you cuss to your brother, or every time you talk back, or every time you argue with me, I'm going to give you an extra chore to do. And how about this last one? I like this. Whoever complains about dinner can wash the dishes. Wouldn't you love to use that one? Somebody came up with that and shared it with me. It's what they did in their household. And I really like that one. Because they shouldn't be complaining about dinner. They should be thankful. Okay, if you're going to give your kids an extra chore, make it a reasonable chore. I have a friend who had a horrible childhood, and she told me about, for example, washing the dishes and her dad saying that she didn't get them clean enough, and he made her pull all the dishes out of the cupboard and wash every single one of them over again. That is not what I'm talking about. When I say give your kids an extra chore, I mean tell them to go scrub the bathroom sink, or to sweep the kitchen floor, or to vacuum the living room floor, or to go dust the living room. Something like that. Something that they can do in 5 or 10 minutes, and it's not going to ruin their night, but it will make them think before they talk back again. Remember when we talked about the difference between frequent small negative consequences and big ones, like the speeding ticket scenario? I think I'm going to tell you that scenario in a little bit here. But small consequences like an extra chore, a little extra chore, given frequently, every time your son pesters your daughter, will be more likely to prompt him to change his behavior than if you send him to bed at 4 o'clock in the afternoon one time. He's going to think, whoa, Dad was really in a bad mood that day, but he'll never do that to me again. Right? Okay. Any other thoughts, questions at this point? Those are the 5 techniques. Do you think they'll work with your teenagers? Okay, it looks like Lori says they do number 4 all the time. Whoever complains about dinner can wash the dishes. That is good. Okay, and Haley says the one time they used the 24-hour rule, they took away everything, music, TV, and PC. Yes, very good. That's the way it will be effective. All right. Haley thinks it'll work. Good. Moving on to supervision. We have to supervise our kids. Um, in my little community, I see the same kids hanging out at the park every afternoon, every evening, all day, every day on during the summertime, and it's like they have nothing constructive to ever do, so they're always hanging out with their hacky sacks or skateboards or whatever. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those hobbies; those are great hobbies, but I think our kids need to be having other things to do in addition to that. Things like chores and a job and reading and real hobbies like painting or learning to ride a horse or growing plants, whatever, you know. Um, Skateboarding's great and hacky sack is great. You know, those are hobbies and that's good, but not when they do it 24/7. They also need to have some other things to do. We need to know the who, what, when, where, and why of our kids all the time. We need to know where they're at, when they'll be home, who they're with, what they're doing, all the time. It is not good enough for your teenager to say, "Bye, I'm going out, I'll be back at 10." Who's he going to be with? What are they going to be doing? Um, it's not even good enough for him to say, "Okay, I'm going to the movie, I'll be back at 11." And you need to find out, is he talking about the 6:30 movie that's done at 8:30? So what's he going to be doing between 8:30 and 11? Or is he talking about the 8:30 movie and what's he going to be doing before 8:30? Do you know when the most pregnancies and drug abuse takes place? During the lunch hour and after school before 5 o'clock. Does that surprise you? Um, a lot of parents don't know where their kids are, who they're with, or what they're doing between 3 and 5 o'clock when they get home from work. You need to have a plan. Um, Cell phones are great for that these days. And you need to be supervising and checking and making sure you know where they are and who they're with. Let me go through some of these kind of quick. When you ask your kids, who are you going to be with, who's going to be there, who's going to be at the party, they may be tempted to say, "Oh, yeah, well, Susie and Mary, my best friends." And you're like, "Oh, yeah, I know Susie and Mary. They're good girls. Everything will be fine." So ask, who else will be there? Who else are you going to meet at the movie theater when you get there? All right? What are you going to be doing? Well, we're going to be going to the movie. What else are you going to be doing? What will you do after that? When will you be home? When is the movie? When is the party over? When is the school dance over? What are you going to be doing from 10 o'clock when the dance is over and 11 o'clock when your curfew is? Where will you be? Um, you need to talk to your kids about these things and get their answers. You don't have to be giving them the third degree. It doesn't have to be mean and strict. It can be a pleasant conversation where you're expressing an interest in their life, but supervising them at the same time. I also think it's really important that we come up with some what if questions, especially with our young teens. What if this party that you're going to and there's supposed to be a parent present, when you get there, there isn't a parent present? What will you do? How will you get home if you rode with Steve and Steve doesn't want to leave? Can you call me? Maybe you need to have a secret code for your kid that when he calls home and says, "Hey, did John call?" That means come and get me because there's something bad going on here. You may save your kids the embarrassment of having to call and say, "Mom, can you come and get me? There's drugs at this party." Or maybe he wouldn't call and tell you that and ask you to come and get him at all, unless he's got a secret code. He calls you and says, "Did John call me back yet?" And that means come and get me. Or you say into the phone, "Okay, that's it. You need to come home right now because John called and he's coming over." And so it gives him an out with his friends. He says, "Oh, I got to go now. John's coming over to my house." Make it up. It's okay. Now, what about bringing the munchies? I had a mom attend one of my classes, and she said that when her daughter started going to sleepovers, when she was like 11 and 12, she would stop by with the goodies, their favorite munchies. And it got so that her daughter and her friends were always happy to see Mom come along because they knew she was coming with something good. And that was just the beginning of a good relationship with her daughter and her friends throughout the teen years. Some little tricks you can use here. You know, I remember when I was like 12 years old in junior high, and somebody invited me to a party. They called me up on the phone, and I'm talking to them on the phone, and they're asking me if I want to go to this party on Friday night. And I didn't want to go because I thought that there was going to be drinking there, and I didn't want to be involved in that. But I didn't want to say, no, I don't want to go, because my friend would have said, why? Why not? Come on, it's going to be a whole lot of fun. You know, I wasn't strong enough to say, well, I'm not interested in drinking, and I know there's going to be drinking there. A lot of our kids are like that, so help them out. In this particular case, what I did was put my hand over the phone, and I said, Mom, can I go to a party Friday night? And whispered, say no. So my mom yelled really loud so that my friend could hear it on the other side of the phone. No, you can't go. And she helped me out. That took care of that. I didn't have the strength to tell my friend, no, I don't want to drink. So I relied on my mom. Let's help our kids out with some of these what-if questions and some secret codes. Talk to your kids about what if this guy picks you up for a date, and rather than taking you to the bowling alley like he said he was going to, he takes you parking. What are you going to do? Come up with a plan. Walk your kids through some of these scenarios. Okay, comments and questions? Joseph says to teach them to be strong and good examples. Yes, we do need to teach our kids how to say, no, no thanks, I'm not interested in drugs. I don't want to, you know, and walk away. Yes, you do want them to develop friendships with good kids. And to do that, you need to be talking to your kids about things like what makes a good friend. Do friends get friends in trouble, or do friends have a good time together without getting each other in trouble? Friends are loyal. Friends help each other, stick by each other. Those kind of things. Okay? Anything else? Let's talk about the issue of supervision along with the issue of trust. How many have you have ever heard, don't you trust me? Actually, the answer to that question is either yes or no. If the answer is yes, I do trust you, there are other reasons for your kids to let you know where they're going to be and for you to supervise them. Some of those reasons are simply things like it is common courtesy between all family members to let each other know where you're going, how you can be gotten a hold of, when you'll be home. You ask your kids to let you know where they're going and when they'll be home, but don't you as well tell them where you're going and when you'll be home? And don't you tell your spouse also? I tell my spouse where I'm going and when I'll be back, and it's not because he doesn't trust me or that he has to supervise me. It's just common courtesy. Otherwise, he may be sitting there going, huh, Where's Natalie? I wonder if she's going to come home and cook dinner tonight. Your kids may be thinking that. It's almost 5:30. I wonder if Mom's going to come make dinner or if I should just go scrounge my own. It is common courtesy to let your family know where you're at. What if there's an emergency? Emergencies do happen. And I'll be honest and let you know that when I was explaining to my children why I wanted to know who, what, when, where, and why, and why I supervised them, and I gave them this reason because of, what if Grandma dies and I need to get a hold of you? They were like, that's lame, Mom. So it didn't hold much water. But we as adults do know that it's true. There could be an emergency. You might need to take off and take care of a crisis. Number 3, it's not a lack of trust. It's your responsibility to supervise your kids. You care about them, you worry about them. It's your job. I used to tell that to my kids a lot. It's my worry to say, it's my job to say, be good and have fun. They smiled. Supervision. I've got the example of my husband because he has he's self-employed and he has his own business and he's got some employees. And when we go on vacation, he calls back periodically to touch base with them and see how everything's going. He is essentially supervising them. But it's not that he doesn't trust them. He knows that they're good employees and that they're working hard, but he wants to make sure that they haven't run into any glitches or problems or questions. So he'll call them periodically and say, how's it going? Is everything working out as planned? Do you need me to order anything, any changes, anything I need to take care of? And I think that's a good example that you can share with your kids, that we supervise our kids in case they run into a problem and they need us. Now, back to this question up here about, don't you trust me? Number 5, your answer might be, no, I don't trust you. And the reason is because last week you said you'd be home at 11 and you weren't home until 11:30. Or last week you told me that you were going to go over to John's house and you weren't there. Trust is earned, and they can earn it back. And one of the ways that they can earn it back is by being where they say they're going to be and coming home when they say they're going to be home. You can check on them and make sure that they really are where they said they were going to be. And that's not it's not wrong, it's not bad, it is your responsibility, and you can help them to see that that is how they can earn your trust back. Yeah, I'm gonna call and make sure that John's mom really is going to be there during this party night. I'm going to call and make sure that you are where you say you're going to be. That's how you're going to earn my trust back. And finally, number 6, an excellent way to supervise your kids is to greet them when they come home at night. And make sure that they are sober and okay. I know that it's hard to wait up for your kids. I used to sleep on the couch with the light on so that when they came in through the door, I would hear them and wake up, and I'd be able to see them, and I'd have to get up to go back to my bed because I didn't want to sleep on the couch all night. So I would stop and visit with them, see how their night was, express some interest in their lives. Who was there? Did you have a good time? What all did you do? And I'd give them a hug and a kiss, just like I do every night, and just like I always had every night since they were little. And then they went to bed. Giving them that hug and kiss, if they know you're going to be there to give them a hug and a kiss, they're going to be much less likely to come home smelling like smoke or marijuana or alcohol. Right? Okay. Let's talk about dating rules and curfews for a few minutes. There are so many options here, and it's really up to you. Different people have different rules. And it takes some thought and consideration to decide what you're going to do for your kids. You know, a lot of families have a set curfew, a set time for weekend nights, and a set time for weekday nights. You can do that. You can even call your local city hall and find out if the city has a curfew for minors, which they very well might. And you can use that as your curfew. But on the other hand, you may want to set the curfew every night depending upon what the kid's going to be doing. So if he's going to the movie and he's going to the 6:30 movie and it's over at 8:30, well then he can probably be home at 9, right? Unless he's got other plans and can tell you what those plans are. Well, we're going to go out for some ice cream afterwards, so I'd like to be able to stay out until 10. Okay, sounds reasonable. That's good. What about prom night? Well, you know, the dance goes until midnight, and then I'd like to go over to Steve's house because his mom's going to be cooking us breakfast, and then we're going to watch a movie. And that means I'll be home at 3. You know, is that okay with you or not? You decide. But at least in that scenario, I knew where my kid was going to be and what he was going to be doing for every hour. It wasn't like I said, okay, yeah, you can come in at 3, and I would have no idea where he would be from the time the dance got over at midnight until 3. You can set the curfew depending upon the circumstances, the situation, what the kids are going to be doing that night. Some nights you may let them stay out longer than others. Maybe you'll have some rules like you can only stay out past midnight, or you can only stay out till midnight once a week or something. You know, it's going to change as your kids get older and as they demonstrate their responsibility and good choices. My kids didn't drink. And they hung out with kids who didn't drink. And they were always hanging out at their friends' houses and things like that. And I knew where they were and what they were doing. And so I was more likely to go ahead and let them stay out late on the weekend because I knew that they were watching a PG-rated movie over at Seth's house, etc. Okay, do you get the difference? Now, dating rules. I'm going to tell you about some of this, and then I'd like to take some time to let you share some of your thoughts on dating rules and curfews. How old should your kids be before they start to date? Is there a difference between individual dates and group dating? How much older or younger can your child's date be? You know, some parents will make a rule for their daughters and say, well, you can't date a guy that's, you know, more than 2 years older than you. But what about your sons? Sons getting asked out by older girls is happening a lot too. Think about it. Is 1 year or 2 years too much? How do you want to handle curfew? I've talked to a lot of parents over the years, and they've had some really interesting limits on where their kids can go on a date and what they can do. I remember one parent who said, you can't go anywhere where the lights aren't on, which would include the movies or a party where the lights are real low. A lot of parents don't let their kids go to drive-ins for obvious reasons. I remember one dad who was an EMT and had been to a lot of car accidents. And his number one most important thing was, are you wearing your seatbelt? When a boy would come to pick up his daughter for a date, he'd go out there and make sure that the car was safe and that she had her seatbelt on. Some of this might seem kind of silly, but it was important to him. And these are your kids. You're responsible for them, and you get to decide what is best for them and what you want to allow and not allow. I remember another family who didn't let their daughters date the same person more than one time per month because they felt that it was really important for their daughter not to get super attached to one guy, especially if it was going to be at the expense of her girlfriend's relationships. But but he didn't want to get her super attached to one guy. So, but he did want her to date and to have friends. So it was like date a lot of different guys. You know, go out with this guy one night and that guy another night, but you can't see the same guy more than once a month. And then as you're making your rules, remember that it is easier to loosen your rules or to make an exception than it is to tighten them. Okay, thoughts? Anybody want the mic? And let's go to some text chats. What do you think about all these dating rules? Okay, Joseph got a question from an earlier slide. Can you be graphic enough to tell them the kids die on the road? Yeah, they know that, but your teens know that. But again, the strong-willed teens will say, "Yeah, but that won't happen to me." All right, Katrina asks, "What if our teen already has a boyfriend? How can we slow it down?" Oh, it's Don asking. Okay, how long has she been dating him? And you can start some rules, and you can let him know, hey, I think you've been seeing this guy too often, and it's at the expense of your girlfriends and your other relationships or your family relationships, and so we're going to put a limit on how often you can go out with him, and how many nights a week you need to stay home, etc. Okay, it's been 3 to 4 months. Yeah, I remember doing that. I'd have to institute uh, some new rules. You know, you need to be home 3 nights a week during the school week, and you know, you can only date that person once a week, whatever. What do you think about that, Don and Katrina? Would that work? Anybody else have any ideas for them? Haley, how's your 12-year-old going on 16? What do you all think is a good time to allow your kids to start dating? You know, Katrina and Don, a father's relationship with a daughter is extremely important. You, as the father, have the opportunity to teach her how she should be treated and expect to be treated by guys. And so it's pretty important that dads do things like take their daughters out on a date, open the door for them, pull out the seat at the dinner table for them, treat her like a princess, the way you want her future boyfriends and husband to treat her, so that she will expect that and go looking for that. Um, Talk about what makes a good relationship and demonstrate that. You know, some gals get into these relationships with guys where, you know, it's all about the guy. It's his sports, his car, you know, everything's talking about him. Demonstrate to your daughters that it's not all about him, that it's about her too. Take her out on a date and talk to her. Ask her questions. Ask her about her dreams and her life. Okay. Lori says, have the standard rules defined before they reach dating age. Oh, Michelle, yes, that is a good idea. Um, and 16, 15, or 16 is, I see a lot of you have written that. 16, 17, those are pretty standard responses. And I think those are reasonable. I let my kids group date when they were younger, like 14 and 15. because they had a great group of kids that they hung out with all the time, and they did things a lot together in a big group. So I don't even know if you'd call it group dating. It was just kind of group activities, going bowling together or watching movies together or going to somebody's house and playing cards or board games or Risk, and they did it, boys and girls together a lot. Um, I thought it was especially important for my sons because I have 3 sons and no daughters. And so this gave them an opportunity to learn how to interact with girls and how to treat girls and to just kind of see what girls are like. Whereas they didn't have sisters to learn that from. So they did a lot of group activities. All right, Haley says, I have a friend who won't set an age for dating. She says to base it on responsibility and if they are ready to date. Yep, you could do that. I think you'd have to define responsibility for your kids, though. Let them know what it is that spells responsible to you. What kind of behaviors do they have to be demonstrating before you'll call them responsible? Okay, Haley says our friend let her daughter group date but went to check on her. She was off in the back with her boyfriend, so she told her she lost her credibility. She was supposed to be with the group. Right, absolutely. And that's good, Haley. I like that your daughter went to check on her. That is the supervision issue. And, especially if you have questions, if you have doubts about your kids, you better be checking on them. And in that particular case, she can tell her daughter straight out, no, I don't trust you. You have lost my trust because of this incident. But you can earn it back. I will be checking on you, and if you're where you say you're going to be and doing what you're supposed to be doing, then you will earn my trust back. And I'll let you go do things again. But until then, no. Okay, anything else? All right. Destructive behaviors. This is another concept that I took from the Parent Project. When we look at lists of behaviors or activities like we see here, some of you would be appalled at these things and would say, my kids aren't going to pierce their ears or any body parts other than their ears until they're 18. Some of you would have a real definitive no against this. Others of you would say, I don't know, it's okay, it'd be fine. It's not permanent. But I like this definition of destructive behaviors. Could this behavior shorten their life or limit their dreams? Things like dropping out of school can definitely limit their dreams. It can limit their job possibilities, the amount of money they'll be making as adults, their fulfillment as an adult if they have to be doing a McDonald's job instead of something more trained. Dropping out of school can limit their dreams. What about being sexually active? Can it shorten their life or limit their dreams? You have to think about this. You and your partner, your other family members should be discussing these things. What do you think about being sexually active? Is your attitude one of, well, all kids do it? Well, if that's your attitude and your expectation, your kids will know that that's what you expect and they will do it. But, on the other hand, if your attitude towards teenage sexuality is, I think that it's important for my kids to save this for their marriage, that there are emotional harms to being sexually active, as well as the fact that there's over 60 STDs and condoms don't prevent the passage of STDs. Let your kids know those things. Voice them. Spell them out. Bring home the research and the pamphlets. I remember hearing somebody say that, you know, kids are nothing but a ball of hormones. They can't help themselves. But then I heard a teen say, that is an insult. I'm much more than a ball of hormones, and I can stop myself. And so I stuck with that. Yes, I think my kids do have self-control. They do have more than just emotions. They also have some thinking faculties. They can be and are mature and responsible, and they can make a choice about this. Um, anyways, could being sexually active shorten your kids' lives or limit their dreams? What about smoking tobacco? Dropping out of sports? Dropping out of school? Joining the wrong crowd? Dating someone 3 years older? Not doing their homework? You know, isn't it interesting that this not doing your homework could certainly limit their dreams and could be classified as a destructive behavior? Much more so than some of these other things like piercing. And yet, parents let their kids get away with not doing their homework all the time. That's why I like this definition of destructive behaviors. I think it's real. Can alcohol and marijuana shorten our kids' lives or limit their dreams? What about dyeing their hair? Listening to music? What kind of music are they listening to? Tattoos, bad language, etc. The Parent Project goes on to divide behaviors into different categories, such as destructive and intolerable, negotiable, or no big deal. And again, you can make your own list here. Take each one of these activities and decide, does it fit into the category of destructive, negotiable, or no big deal? It's up to you to really think about these things and see, where do they lead? Is dyeing hair no big deal, or does it lead to something else? You decide. These are your kids. You know your kids, what they're likely to do. Okay, thoughts and comments. All right, Joseph says that I notice a lot on age limit for dating, which is a Western custom. It's not so much in the rest of the world. It depends on the person, character, and intentions. Well, there's a good thought. Could be going into the military is dangerous to their health, as in a destructive behavior. Yep, that's for you to decide. Some things that this culture supports is not necessarily the only way or the good way, working for money. Right, that's true. Yeah, so, if I think you're responding to what I said about dropping out of school and having to work at McDonald's, maybe that's fine. Maybe some people would like that. My kids wouldn't, I know that. They're in college and they have particular goals and, dream jobs that dropping out of school would limit their dreams. Okay, any other comments or thoughts here? Do you like this idea of looking at these behaviors and categorizing them, deciding whether it fits into the category of destructive, negotiable, or no big deal? You guys are really quiet tonight. Okay. I guess we're down to 5 minutes here, so we better move on. Clothing and hairstyles. Again, is it destructive, negotiable, or no big deal? But do be aware that along with clothing comes an attitude. If you'll think about the way you stand and walk and talk when you're wearing your professional attire or your church clothes versus when you're wearing your sweats, is there a difference? Are you more likely to use slang in your sweats than in your dress up clothes? Maybe, maybe not. Number two, if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, it may get shot like a duck. There are very real instances where this is happening. Kids will accidentally wear gang clothing, gang colors or numbers, and not even realize it and get shot. It does happen. But even worse than that, I think, is that very often, again, along with the clothing comes an attitude. And kids will start dressing in gang-like clothing and then walking in the gang-like walk and acting and talking, and pretty much soon they're gang wannabes. And let me mention that I recently read that in Nampa, Idaho, there is a higher concentration of I believe it was gang members per capita than in LA. Isn't that amazing? We think of Idaho as being, backwards, but it's just right up there with LA in this particular situation in Nampa. I had a friend who grew up in the 70s, was a teenager in the 70s, and we dressed horribly back then. Really bad, baggy blue jeans that hung on the ground with our bare feet, and the frayed we'd be walking on, our pants and fraying the bottom of the bell bottoms, and t-shirts, ratty old t-shirts, and barely combed our hair. And so when her kids started dressing like gang members, she thought, well, they look better than we did. But that was the wrong thought. It didn't work, because along with the attire came the attitude and the behavior. And her kids ended up in trouble, big trouble. So be aware of clothing and hairstyles. But on the other hand, choose your battles. Again, it's up to you. You need to know your kids, what they're likely to do or not do. Next, music, TV, books, magazines, and websites. Is it encouraging them or destroying them? We have got to take a look at all of these things. What are they looking at on the web? What are they reading? What kind of magazines are they looking at? What do the words say on their music? It's going to take some time and effort, but you can find out. A lot of the lyrics to different songs can be found on the internet. You can ask their friends. You can ask other friends' parents. Sometimes the CDs come with a little booklet that has the words written down. Music today can be very, very scary. What does it promote? Healthy values or sex, violence, rape, killing, and suicide? Are the songs that they're listening to talking about shooting cops and raping your mother? Songs do say those things today. We need to know what our kids are listening to. I worked with a mom whose daughter was way into this one particular song that she was listening to over and over again. Well, it turns out that this song glorified suicide. And she had on her bedroom wall a poster of a famous rock star who had committed suicide, and there she was idolizing him and, digging this suicide song. And good thing Mom stepped in, because she found out that her daughter was suicidal. All right, number 3, we need to respect our children's privacy unless you have reason to believe that their health or their safety is in danger. Then your responsibility to protect your children supersedes their right to privacy. If you think that they may be into drugs, search their room. You need to know about it. You need to handle it. You need to do something about it, intervene, and stop it. It is not good for them. If the music that they're listening to or their books are bad for them, get rid of it. Take it back, throw it out the window, return it. If they say, oh, but it's my friend's, return it to the friend, or better yet, return it to the friend's parents. Do you know your kid's listening to this and this is what it says? The Attorney General's office for Idaho has put out a really good video on how to protect your teens and what they're watching and are participating in websites, specifically things like MySpace and YouTube. Check it out. Here's the email or the website address. You can get a copy of this on CD. I believe you can also watch it right there on the website. It is very informative. It's brief, but it really gives you a clue as to what your kids are doing on the internet and how they're corresponding with one another and what kind of stuff they're sharing and saying. And you need to know that one kid every 10 minutes is being solicited by a convicted sex offender. It's serious business. And the kids are accidentally and unknowingly giving away way too much information on themselves on the web. So look into this, share the information with your kids. Okay, we're out of time. I think we need to close here. We've got a couple more slides, but we'll go ahead and finish them up next week. We're going to talk about peer influence, homework, getting your kids to do their homework, and suicide, running away, other tough issues next week. There they are. But we do have some homework for this week, and the more you do your homework, the more change you will see in your family. Do remember to continue to give your kids lots of positive praise, make positive predictions in their lives, have some of those no-risk or no-pressure conversations with them. And here's 3 homework assignments. Try and do those too. Open up some conversations with your kids. Get them talking. Let them know that they are free to talk. You're not going to yell at them if they say something that you don't like. Let them know that you're always available to listen and to talk, and for them to bounce ideas off of. All right, it's been a good night. Hope you learned something, and I hope you have a really good week. And I'll see you next week.